And our history, as we have always known it, is history that is based on oral transfer. You have to talk, I listen, you talk, I listen kind of history. But we can now start noting it down. You can say the reason why these things happened was this and this, and you note it down. We can't all be historians, we can't all be writers, but we can all have a piece of history that we can pass down. We can all note it down and pass it on to the next generation. African history is not just storytelling. African history is not culture and heritage. African history is not traditional. African history is just not an identity or simply clothes and simply words. It's not race. African history is a weapon we have to use in this current generation in order for us to move forward. African history is, it's something that we overlook as the last means to resolve any country problem at large, or even continental as Africa in general to solve. But if we had the privilege of having Kwame Nkrumah sit with us right now, or Julius Nyerere sit with us now, or John Magufuli sit with us now, they will probably tell us what makes us Africans and what makes our history so powerful isn't that we had colonialism or slavery or genocide or civil wars or ethnic or wars within us, but we had an identity, we had an history prior to all this. And we decided as Africans to move forward to achieve this. In 1965, a British historian once wrote, "Africa has no history. What's present now is European history in Africa. And perhaps in the future there'll be something to write about." And now that we are in the future, which is present right now, there's little African history to be written about. And I don't blame anyone that there's little African history to be written about, because even during those moments, little was paid attention to record African history so that you and I can relate to it, so that you and I can see things from a perspective of not colonialism and slavery and genocides and all these things. It's so incredible how we have international organizations record Africa when it's at war, but they never record us when we are winning. There's simply few records of us achieving and winning, because they want us to always see Africa as a dead end, as darkness, a continent without history, a continent that has no history unless a European is in it. This is why we need to tell our African stories. We can chant and celebrate as much as we want, but if you and I don't stand up and say, this is the African history we're going to tell, please do not think I'm disregarding the history that has existed. It has shaped some certain things in our lives. But we also need to celebrate the history that people don't want us to celebrate. I'll give an example. Kenya and Tanzania, their official language is Swahili. It's not English, it's Swahili. That's history that needs to be celebrated. That's history that should be making noise all over the world. That's history that people from all various parts of Africa should admire for. Look at what Paul Kagame did to Rwanda. There's no ethnic group in there. It's one Rwandanese. They're not identified by tribe or ethnicity. They're identified by unity. I'm Rwandanese everywhere. We speak Kinyarwanda everywhere. That's history. That's not celebrated. That's something that needs to be celebrated. That's something that needs to be recorded. That's something that, as the current generation, should look up to and say, that's a history that I would love to tell my children. That's a history I need to pass on to the next generation. Do you know that history repeats itself? In 1963, Kwame Nkrumah actually and Julius Nyerere, when they were meeting to form the Organization of African Unity, which was OAU, which is currently African Union, they actually said we should move forward with one currency, one language. And most of the African countries that were there, the 32 heads of states and government officials, they didn't see that plan. That was 1963. And here comes Paul Kagame. It's like literally seeing Kwame Nkrumah come to life. One language, one identity. And see it through Kenya, see it through Tanzania, one language. Everywhere in the whole entire country. So there's no language barrier. There's no inferiority complex. If I can understand you, I can understand you and I can live with you in peace. There's no misunderstanding. This is the African history that should be celebrated. People should be able to go from decades past and see how it's transforming us. So I urge you that African history shouldn't just be based on clothes that we wear traditionally. It shouldn't be hashtag Africa. You and I should educate one another on African history. We should celebrate these things. For decades, we have been talking about how the genocide and the civil wars all around Africa and the post-election violence and the election violence that are going through. When you and I can stand up and tell the Africans' history to people that don't know it and to people that are falling victims of such, we are one Africa. We are not united by slavery. We are not united by colonialism. We are not united by genocides and civil wars and tribalism. We are united because we have one identity, and that is Africa. Kwame Nkrumah might not be here to see this, but I hope the next African generation goes back and reads the Africa Must Unite speech. We should move forward united with a united act because they are here. Neocolonialism is here. It's real. Racism isn't done. It's here. It's real. And we're not only facing it now in abroad, we're facing it as well in our own homes, in our own countries, sorry. African history is a weapon to independence of the mind, of a perspective of what Africa should always be like. We cannot always pass on to the next generation trauma and trauma. It happened. Yes, colonialism happened. Slavery happened. But what's happening now is we can stand up and tell the African story to say once upon a time there was this speech that was given, and this leader had this intention to ensure that every African country is free. Stand up, Africa, and tell the African history. We cannot just wear African clothes and celebrate the African beats and say we're Africans. We have to tell the African story. We have to tell the African history the way we want to tell it. Or else, someone will quote us again in 2050 or 2060 to say Africa has no history. And of course, little is being recorded. But we can record now. You and I can record now. You and I can write it down now. You and I can pass it to the next generation. Innovation is happening. Change makers are happening. Culture dynamics are taking places. Influences taking place in all areas of our lives. People were being overseen and some were being not recognized. But now we can recognize people that are adding to African history. And when I mean African history, it's just not politics and the economy and social status, but even as simple as people that are humanitarians, people that are changing the world, people that are giving to the world. We can't always depend on aid, but if some African person out there is sponsoring someone, building schools, building education, let it go in the history archive that such an individual existed and this was what they did, so that other people can relate and see to it. You see, in my country, in Zambia, we believe mostly that what a white man makes is better than what an African makes. That has been the unconscious bias. And I came to realize this, that it's not just part of Zambia, but it's everywhere. But we cannot keep on not telling or supporting or relying on that unconscious bias. We will not have any history. We will not have any proper invasions and innovations taking place currently to share to the current generation. African history is happening every single day. And it's no longer called African history, it's called modern African history. So you get to see it, you get to experience it, you get to talk it, note it down. You can note down all these things that are happening, but also note down the wins of Africa. We cannot always let UNESCO come and record and keep it in the archives when you and I are present, we're in that place and everything is happening, and we can't record it. And we can't pass it on. And our history, as we have always known it, is history that is based on oral transfer. You have to talk, I listen, you talk, I listen kind of history. But we can now start noting it down. You can say, the reason why these things happened was this and this, and you note it down. We can't all be historians, we can't all be writers, but we can all have a piece of history that we can pass down. We can all note it down and pass it on to the next generation. It's inspiring when you see kids from the western part of the world recite their founding fathers. And we have kids in our countries and in our continent that can't even recite their founding fathers. Everybody knows David Kenneth Kaunda, but how many people know Simon Mwewa or Simon Kapwepwe? How many people know Betty Kaunda? How many people remember the first founding fathers of the countries? And of course, we should not always celebrate political history, but let's celebrate also social history as well, economic history. How did things move then that they're moving differently now? And how can we go back in history and see how they made it work? And that's a history that you should tell. And that's a history that I would love to tell. Most people usually ask me, why do you love history? Because I saw history and I saw African history from a different perspective. I didn't see the bruising and the blood and the genocide and the colonialism and the slavery. I saw a happy, independent African history. A history that has so much rich history to be told. Recently, in the years back, Musa Mansa came up as one of the richest empires to have ever lived. And it shocked me that people were knowing about that. And people were posts and tags. But that's history that has been there for decades. But people don't say it. And people don't share it. And it was a trend all over. But it's there. It's been there. Now imagine when we journey together and discover hidden African history, how many things are we going to discover? How many things are going to shock us and just make us feel like, oh my God, Africa has so much to offer. We can't celebrate the pain anymore. Let's celebrate the wins. Let's write African history together. Technology has helped. The change of civilization has helped. It's easy now. You can sit down with someone and record and find out why certain things happen, why this happened, why African history is different, why our cultures are different. We can't just end up wearing African clothes and feel like we are culturally rooted to our history. There's more to it. People need to know themselves. I want to leave you with this by Paul Kagame. We cannot turn the clock back, nor can we undo the harm caused, but we have the power to determine the future and to ensure that what happened never happens again. This was Paul Kagame. We can never turn back the time. We can never turn back the past. It happened, but we can move forward and ensure that our future doesn't repeat itself. Let's tell African history together. I want you to take a time on Instagram or Facebook or anything or wherever, and just type in African history or type in your country's history and see how much will come up there. If you type in African history, it's always related to colonialism, it's always related to slavery, it's always related to all that. But there's more we can tell the world. There's more that Africa can tell the world. There's more African history that we can tell the world. So literally, take a time off and let's tell African history together. You don't have to be a historian. You don't have to be seated and do a podcast. But you can share the history that you know with us. And we can tell it to the whole world. I am Tale Chomba, And this has been Italy, the Historian podcast. Together we can tell the African story. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.